Hi, I'm Rose. Here today with me is Ashton Applewhite, pro-aging activist, and she's here to tell us today how we're going to rewire the way we look at aging.
That's true. You never hear the phrase pro-aging because you see the phrase anti-aging plastered everywhere, but aging is living. We are aging from the day we're born, right?
Yes.
So it makes no more sense to be anti-aging than anti-breathing.
So what started you on this crusade?
I started writing about this, although I didn't realize it at the time, because I was in my mid-50s and I was afraid of getting old. And it was a chance comment of my mother-in-law's, who at the time was in her mid-80s, and she and her husband Bill are booksellers. And they said, why don't you write about something people ask us all the time? So when are you going to retire? So I liked the idea. It was upbeat and soundbite friendly, and I started interviewing people in their 80s and 90s who work. And they're a dime a dozen, and they were amazing. And neither of those facts was a surprise. But you know, I'm a researcher, and I started learning about longevity at the same time, and everything I learned was so much more positive and so much more nuanced than what I thought. I mean, one example, the percentage of Americans over 65 in nursing homes, I would have guessed it was at least 20, maybe 30. I mean, knowing nothing. It's 4%.
You're kidding.
Down from 5 in the last decade. The number is dropping.
That's great.
I started a blog called So When Are You Going to Retire?, which became This Chair Rocks, because I was so taken by surprise. I was sure that old people were depressed because they were old and they were going to die soon. It turns out that older people have better mental health than young or middle-aged people, right?
Older people in their 70s and 80s?
70s, 80s, 90s. It's called the U-shaped happiness curve.
Why do you think that is?
Certainly, a life perspective enables older people to understand more where to put their energies and not to sweat the small stuff, and to have more emotional resilience. And we're better able to adapt to bad news and put things in perspective and prioritize better. And the fear of death diminishes because as people, the awareness that time is short doesn't fill people with dread, which just seemed obvious to me when I started. It makes us spend our time more wisely. And that enables us to live in the moment.
Well, what about the older people that are miserable?
My goal is to have people look at their own attitude to their own age and aging and see that a lot of the beliefs we have are not based in fact, right? I mean, which I think we know. We get past midlife and it's all supposed to suck, and it doesn't suck. So why then? Where do those beliefs come from, right? They come from a consumer culture that tells us that wrinkles are ugly, that tells us that aging is a disease, which it is not, and that wants to sell us remedies for these things. The same reason they tell women that if you have big hips, you're ugly, right? It's about acceptance of who we are in the world. You know, another reason they're unhappy is because we have this diagnosis of Alzheimer's, even though there is no definition of Alzheimer's. No one knows what it is, but we say, oh, you can't remember where your keys are? You have mild cognitive impairment. You need to take a drug. And then you think, oh my God, I'm on a slippery slope down to dementia. You know what percentage of Americans actually, this was another thing I learned, actually have Alzheimer's? 2%.
Really?
Yes.
Nothing.
The real epidemic is anxiety over memory loss. We blame things on aging that are not dependent. Here's an example. I say when I lost my car keys in high school, I didn't call it a junior moment.
That's great. You know, there's also interesting research in your book that shows how attitude towards aging has an effect. Can you talk about how it affects us emotionally and physically going into, let's say, our 40s and 50s?
There was a really interesting experiment done with 2 groups of college kids, a control group and one that was primed with negative words and images about aging. And the experiment actually measured the speed at which the 2 groups walked to the elevator. And the group that had been primed with the negative images, these are college kids, walked to the elevator more slowly. That is how powerful negative images about aging are. So imagine the effect of those images. We have a lifetime of them thrown at us. And the really interesting results of that, they have studied the brains of people who, when they died, were older people who were super sharp, and discovered that their brains are full of Alzheimer's type plaque and tangles. And what set the people apart who functioned better was they had a purpose in life. They had a positive attitude towards their own aging. They were trying to get something done. It could have been just to beat Mrs. So-and-so at bridge. It could have been to see their grandchild graduate from medical school. Whatever it is, you don't have to want to save the world. But they had a purpose, they had a goal, they were in it, they were engaged in life, and that confers protection against the actual brain decay that we associate with Alzheimer's.
Give us some tips on how we can age gracefully and embody that.
Well, I think the most important thing I would say is to break away from the shackles of age denial, to stop pretending we're never going to get old, and to understand that aging is a process that is powerful and natural. So look for ways in which we use young as a placeholder for good, and old for bad, because those are discriminatory. Those are stereotypes. They're not accurate. And look at and talk to people of all ages, young people too. Ageism operates against young people too. Any generalization about anyone.
So we want to help raise awareness.
Excellent.
Okay, what can we do? How can we get more involved?
Well, I would urge everyone to buy and read my book, which if you go to my website, which is thischairrocks.com, that's where you can find out how to buy the book. You can sign up for my mailing lists, which I will never give your email away, and find out where I'm speaking and what I'm up to. And there's lists of anti-ageism resources on the website as well.
Ashton Applewhite, thank you very much. This Chair Rocks, out March 15th.